All right, welcome back to the channel. We're going to be reacting to Alex Hormozi's one of his more recent videos, how to buy anything you want without going broke. We're going to jump in. This is going to be like my viewpoint. I'm obviously not as successful of an entrepreneur as Alex here. He's got a few years on me here, but like this is my viewpoint from everything I've learned building a seven-figure business and how I think it can actually apply to you. So let's jump into the video.
There's 4 ways to buy anything, and I'll show you one unique way. That's what actually got me this building. And so let me walk you through it.
Yeah, I think I could be mistaken. I'm pretty sure they paid $60 to $70 million for that headquarters down in Vegas. Impressive. Definitely would love to have a facility like that for like in-person training and stuff in the future, and like just building a team. I've become more convinced over time that having people in person is better than remote.
You've got what I would consider past money. So that would be savings. So that's earnings that you had in the past, and that's money.
Let's see what this reaction or this thing here. Interesting. Yeah, I'm wondering if they got a lawsuit or if they're just trying to be more prepared with how FTC is regulating and just like the online coaching consulting space currently. That's very interesting that they're adding this here to their YouTube videos now.
Money that you put away. The next money is you have income money. So this is the money that you make every single month. You can spend this money rather than touching your savings. This makes sense. Then you've got debt money, which is basically future earnings. Like this is money, I'm going to take debt and I'm going to pay with future money, right? And I'm going to have to pay this debt off. And then finally is the category that I like to have, which is, and I'll call it new money. Now you're like, what does that even mean? That's what I'll explain. So I've noticed amongst the friends that I have that are the best with money, that they're wealthiest with money, they're okay buying things that are big, grandiose, right? Now, some of them buy big houses, some of them buy big cars, some buy big yachts, big buildings, whatever it is, right? And I had a business owner who came here and he was like, hey, I'm choosing between 2 offices. I've got basically a sensible office and I've got a much bigger office that I'm really excited about. He said, which one do you think I should take? And I said, which one do you want? And he said, the big one. And this guy was a very good salesman. And I said, okay, here's the deal. You can buy the big one. It was 2.5 times the size, or at least 2.5 times the price, and it was a little bit nicer, whatever. I said, but the deal is, you got to pay it off in a year. He was like, I can do that. And I was like, right, then don't worry about it. And so the thing is that I would say these are kind of almost like different personality types in terms of where people are taking the money from. Now, the reason that I bring up this building being a significant purchase is it was less that the price was a significant purchase and more so that I didn't need this building at the time. I just wanted to have a place to have a home gym that would be more than like, it'd be like a commercial gym. And I wanted to have a place for meetups and things like that. And I could come up with a rational explanation that between all the portfolio companies, we were spending about $4 million a year in event spaces. And I was like, well, if I had a big enough space for all of them to do their internal meetings, their quarterlies, fly out their staff and their team and have a venue, then I could probably save that and it would pay for the building. But I remember Layla was like, hey, you know, maybe we should just get like a 5,000 square foot building. So this building's about 36,000 square feet, much bigger. And I remember hearing this and I was like, I mean, that's appropriately sized for where we're at now, but it's not the size building that I would want it to be for where I want to go.
So this is all really interesting because he's kind of like, and like this is one of the things we talk about in our programs all the time is how people will make a purchase decision, and especially like amiable buyers, or like if you're talking about different buyer types, right? They will then rationalize it like after the fact, and like most people do this anyways. Where they'll rationalize, they make the purchase decision and then they rationalize it to themselves why they made that purchase decision. So like, oh, he's being like, oh, we need this much to grow. We need this much event space. We need this much for offices. This is like our projected growth, right? To rationalize buying the bigger office instead of getting the office that they needed at the time, right?
And so I remember telling her, I said, I promise if we buy this building, I will make sure that it makes us more money than it has cost us. And I would say that a behavior that has served me extraordinarily well is looking at new money. Meaning, if I buy this building, can I find something that will pay off the building? Now, of course, I had the expenses on the portfolio side. We could have just saved the $4 million a year that we spend in venues and all that stuff. Sure. But I was like, I'll bet you there's something that we can do with our existing resources, and this is the key part, is that it's sawdust money. It's money using your existing resources that you're currently underutilizing to generate new money for a specific project. And so
and we'll see if he like talks about this. He like dropped like the sawdust money term. Being an Oregon boy, considering my uncle worked in a particle board plant for 30 plus years. What he's referring to there is, for a long time, these mills, when you cut wood, you get sawdust, right? It is that material that the blade is removing from the wood, and it becomes all these really fine particles. And for years, they would throw it out, and then they got like a little bit bigger brain, and they said, no, let's not throw it out. Let's burn it, boil some water, generator, power the factory. And then they got a little bit bigger brain after that, because they're like, well, this is like high quality wood. What if we added a little bit of glue to this and created this thing called particle board, right? Now we have a finished product that we can send out, and guess what? Like all of your cabinets, IKEA furniture, your desks, like all of this crap behind me, all those cabinets, all particle board with a laminate cover on top of it, and it all used to be crap. So his whole thing is like, where are like the places in your business where you're already creating a product that you could additionally monetize to bring in future cash flows into your business. The other thing, and I really like the investments, the savings, the debt, like his whole thing with new money, and this is kind of referenced, and I don't know who was the first person to talk about this. The first person, the earliest date that I have off the top of my mind is Robert Kiyosaki in Rich Dad Poor Dad, and he doesn't call it new money, but because oftentimes we look at things as individuals, and especially if you weren't raised in like a very, let's call it like savvy business-oriented household, the mindset is usually like, we don't have money for that, because if you are working for a job, you might get raises. There's some small things you might do on the side. Side hustles are more popular now, but realistically, like if you have two income parents off salary, it is very much like a very flat income. It is flat, sloping slightly up to the right, very gentle gradient. Like you can't really adjust that a ton. So oftentimes people will say, oh, we can't afford that. When in reality, with the whole new money thing, the sawdust money, whatever you want to call it, you're not asking yourself the question of saying like, can we afford this? You're asking yourselves, how can we afford this? What can we do in order to make this purchase, make this lifestyle change, get this building, get this new equipment, bring on these new staff for our business, get this new software, whatever it is, right? So more than anything, rather than having a process, like the valuable thing that's occurring here is the change in the mindset. You're framing things differently, and you're looking at them differently to be like, wow, this is what we can actually do to change the current position that we are in, and therefore change our reality.
My favorite way of doing this is like, if Daniel wants to buy a boat or wants to buy a car, I love the idea of him being like, so I'm just going to work one extra day per week over the next year, and then I'm going to buy it. The richest people I know, that is the behavior that they typically use. I want this thing, and so I'm going to go make the money to buy the thing. I'm not going to use my existing income. I'm not going to use my existing resources. I'm not going to use my savings to buy it. I'm not going to go into debt unless I know that I'm going to pay it off within a year and I have no prepayment penalty and I have a clear plan of how I'm going to do it. They have a clear plan of how they're going to make the money in a very defined time period. And it's from doing above and beyond. It's looking at all the stuff you got. And the reason that I like this is I was talking to a good friend of mine, Sharon Servatza. He's president of Real. Actually just became a board member, excuse me. And he said, you just want to write yourself a swimming pool. And I was like, what does that mean? He said, so Paul McCartney, the Beatles, used to say he wanted a swimming pool. And everyone's like, well, how are you going to pay for it? Now, obviously, he has the money for a swimming pool. But he didn't want to use his savings. He didn't want to use his income and his royalties. He didn't want to go into debt for it. And so what did he do? He was like, I'm just going to go write a song. And so he writes a song, and he writes himself a swimming pool from the money that he collects from selling the song, right? And so I think about this.
So love this example, but like kind of tough, right? Using his boat example, you want to go buy a boat. You look at like a new Malibu boat, and it's like $200,000 for like the coolest wake boat. But then you decide to be a little bit more realistic. You look at like a used Yamaha or whatever, right? And you get like into the $30,000 range, right? And then you kind of like work backwards. You don't, you know, you need something where you can do a skill that you can sell like after hours on your work. Door dashing, you know, you do the price per hour, you know, you're making $10 per delivery. It's not the most cost effective thing. If you go a little bit higher skill, like a lot of home services or you know, things you can do for homes, like setting up smart homes. And I'm gonna use the example here of like epoxying garage floors. You can charge more for that, have higher margin. And because you're kind of like, it's a little bit hard because you have to go get the clients yourself, right? But like, let's say you epoxy floors, you charge, you know, $2,500 per garage, and let's say you have $1,000 in expenses between like epoxy paint, sealant, the little flake things, whatever, and you need to buy some rollers, you know, some buckets, some other stuff like that, right? Some core costs, but like $1,000 per one, so you're pocketing roughly $1,500 pre-tax from that, right? Again, $1,500, you need to buy a $30,000 boat. You got to sell 20 of those in order to buy your $30,000 boat. You kind of worked your way backwards over a summer, right? Or, you know, going into the summer, like if you started today to do this, you know, you got to do 5 a month for 4 months in order to get your boat. You can have your boat by what? July, August, right? May, June, July, August. Yeah, August, 4 months. I can't count because today's the 1st. But yeah, that's what it looks like, because obviously not everyone can write a song. He's using this really famous example, but like that's like practically what it could look like for the majority of you, right? Maybe you live in a more rural area. Maybe you need to figure out how you know, start a custom hay cutting company. And, you know, that's hard because you have to get a loan on capital to get equipment to do that. Maybe you figure out how you can get permits to go out, cut down oak trees, right? Stack, cure, and sell firewood, you know, $200 to $300 a cord there. You know, look at like what is common in your area. The epoxy one's great because everyone has homes, right? You just might be limited in the number of people who live in your area if you live in a more remote area. If you're in a metropolitan area, that might be more difficult because you might be competing with professional companies. But there might not be companies that are going through and setting up smart home systems and writing custom codes. So like the Google Home communicates with the blinds, for example, to open and close, you know, morning and evenings based off of the sun, right? And, you know, you can do that. You can use AI to leverage your coding skills to come up with the code you need to write for that. And, you know, there's tons of boomers that wouldn't even know where to start that would, you know, love to have something like that in their homes, for example. And that's just like one aspect beyond everything else you can do between, you know, if we're talking about like having yellow locks that automatically lock or unlock during certain time periods, or automatically lock at night in case you forget, automatically alarming security systems after a certain hour, so on and so forth. With these smart homes, there's so many things you can do, right? If you're younger and, you know, you're not as techy, look at starting a lawn care business, right? You get some of that recurring revenue. You can build up towards your goals. Maybe it's, you know, buying a nicer vehicle, saving towards college, whatever that may be.
This a lot because I think it's a different way of thinking about money. It's like I want this thing, and so I don't want to limit that thing. If anything, I want to use that thing to motivate me to find other resources. So what I'm being is resourceful rather than draining resources I have. I'm finding new resources by utilizing existing assets that are currently under my control. And so this is fundamentally like people are like, well, you know, you could Airbnb one of the rooms out. And it's like, okay, that's one of the things I'm going to do. But I also have some time. So it's like, maybe I'll drive Uber. There was one of my favorite customers ever at my gym. She was a mom of 4, single mom. She didn't have the money for the gym membership. And she was like, well, I could drive Uber one day a week and that I would be able to afford it. And I was like, great, then do that. And so that's what she did. And she was one of my longest standing members, lost 100 pounds. And it's like, there's a shift that happens when you decide to do it that way. And I think there's something to be said about creating a vacuum,
That's like the other thing in the gig economy. Like Fiverr and Upwork, it can be like really hard because it's so competitive to get jobs on and you end up competing with people overseas. But, you know, DoorDash, Uber, any of those things where it requires like people in person, there's just so many people who don't want to work or leave their house to work, right? It's not even that they don't want to work, they just don't want to leave their house to work, right? That's the more and more common thing. So there's just so many ways where you can compete and you can like look at your goals. And for like some of the bigger goals, it might involve you starting more of a business or a side hustle that can turn into a business versus just like a side hustle like Uber Or you can pay for your gym membership, right?
Creating space. I've heard the saying like make yourself poor, right? Of the idea of like how do I create this deprivation? How do I create this threshold that all of a sudden increases my demand for money, right? Because everybody has a demand for money. Like you have a certain lifestyle that you have grown accustomed to. And so that's your minimum threshold. That's your minimum requirement for living. The real wealth comes from being able to continue to jack this up while keeping this low, of course. But in those instances, when you do want to buy the sweet ride, because I'm not, like, people think of me as an aesthetic, and I am to a large degree. But if I want to buy a sick-ass home gym, which I do have, I would rather that money come from new stuff. Either you can do extra stuff to get the thing, or I think the 201 version of this is, how do I use the thing to make even more money? And so part of the reason we spun up the advisory services was actually like me fulfilling a promise to Layla of like, okay, we'll find a way to use the building to generate it.
So one of the things that I think about here, and I agree with him a lot, but you know, my wonderful wife, Kenda, inspired me to think about this. Not everything you do necessarily has to make you money, right? You also run this risk where it's like, if you're trying to figure out how to monetize your home gym and you really love working out, right? You run the risk of like not loving working out anymore because you're forcing yourself to try and generate revenue from it. Now that doesn't mean you shouldn't find like new ways or new things to do, but like part of it too is like, hey, like home gym, you don't have to spend like 30 minutes commuting back and forth. If you are, you know, a disciplined individual, I am not always that individual. You might not always be that individual, right? But like if you're a disciplined individual, you might say, hey, I'm going to dedicate like these 30 minutes to going live every single day on YouTube for my business in order to scale it up, right? And that time, you know, what time that home gym is saving me is going to pay for this new thing. Again, it's like, what's the sawdust in this given scenario?
Income to cover the building, because I do want to have this sick home gym, which will be a complete and utter waste of space, besides the fact that I think it's dope, and why have money if you can't spend it? And you can't take it with you anyways. And so this may seem like a wild departure from some of the content that I make, but this is obviously targeted at someone who probably has a little bit more, is a little bit further along. All right, if you're broke, don't do that. If you're broke, just focus on the new money stuff, right? But if you have some, I think that you stay ahead of your spending by not increasing your lifestyle relative to your income, but by increasing the new money relative to the new purchase, which typically are defined. And so it doesn't have to be forever. So if you're like, well, I don't want to work overtime all the time, fine. Then you can just work overtime for a year, work overtime for 6 months, work overtime for a month, so that you can afford the thing. And I think it's always, when you think about it like that, is I have to add this on top. I don't touch my flows, right? I don't touch my income flow, and I don't want to create a liability with the debt. And savings is like, that's my nut, right? I don't want to use up my nest egg, right? So I got to go make it. And if this
Well, and yeah, this comes back to like what I said is like, if you're salaried, like, or even if you run a business, unless your business is growing like very, very quickly, either at a linear or exponential rate, like oftentimes you kind of figure out like, what is new money? Where can I do this? Because you're very staggered or you're very flat, right? You don't have that upward mobility potential per se. But like all of this is really good. Like it's a good thought process for if you want new things. What I do recommend though is like, how can you figure out like on those new things, like, because like a lot of people will talk about, was it like the 10, 30, 60 rule of like needs, wants, investments or whatever. But it's like, how do you get the want money or how do you get the new money to pay for your wants? The other thing too to consider is like, what new money can you throw towards investments? Because like maybe you want as your goal, you want to retire when you're 30 or 35 or 40, right? What's your target? Have you actually done the research to know how much you need invested in order to comfortably retire? A lot of times people just throw out like numbers like, oh, I want to retire my mom, or oh, I want to retire by this age. But then you ask them, well, do you know how much you need in order to retire? And they'll be like, oh, $1 million. I'm like, you realize $1 million is $40,000 a year of like investment income based off of like the 4% rule, right? And then they kind of like, you see them doing some mental math and like, well, shoot, that won't even pay for my current lifestyle. And it's like, okay, is that before or after debt, right? And all of these different things. So you have to also like have the knowledge, right? I'm a big proponent on this channel, like my stupid thumbnail or whatever on the channel, or my header, is like staction, right? The idea of like studying and taking action and combining those two things, because just doing crap usually doesn't get you quite where you want to go, right? Anyways, just circling back, new money, it's a great perspective to have.
This has just been this behavior that I've observed from the people that I know that are the wealthiest and the people who enjoy their money the most. And I think that's the thing, is like, it's one thing to have money, because I know plenty of people who obviously have money, but some of them, I don't think they enjoy their money. And it's because they're always, it's like they're like afraid. And there's some of this whole idea of like you have to be abundant and all that stuff. I know tons of people who are super scarcity mindset and have a lot of money because they just don't like spending it. And so like there's something to be said for that. But that's if you make money the goal. And if you do make money the goal, then by all means don't spend it, because then money's the goal. So fine. But if money isn't your goal, then the people that I've seen that are the happiest, that I think spend money well, they use money like a tool, is they use an expense or use something that they know they're going to consume. They know it's not a good investment. And they say, fine, I know it's not a good investment, so I'm not going to use my income to buy it. I'm going to use something that I already have that I'm underutilizing, which might be just your time. You might take on a new client project. You might take on some one-on-one services that you wouldn't normally take on, right? Those types of things can be defined period, because you're like, well, it's not going to increase the enterprise value of the business. It's not going to be some sellable asset, but I do want this thing, and I don't want to touch how my existing infrastructure functions. It's just one behavior. And I think many of you, like, if you're like me, like I don't like spending money, and I've tried to learn my way out of it, which is I don't like spending money that's like my main money. It's like my core money. It's the money comes in from businesses, distributions. That's my main thing. But if I want to buy something crazy, then I'm just got to be willing to do something crazy for it. And the weirdest thing happens is that I get almost more excited about making that money than the money that I make every single day, because I know that that money is going towards this specific thing. So I'm like, I'm building a home gym right now. I'm buying equipment right now. Like as I'm doing this, I'm almost like more joyful about doing the work because I know exactly what it's going towards. And so just a little behavior that I've picked up over the years, something that I've observed in other people, that I've used myself, that has been wildly valuable. And if you have that, if you've got two machines that you could buy for your business, and one's a little bit sweeter than the other, and you can't really justify the expense, then just take the delta and be like, I'm gonna go make that myself because I think it's sicker. And I have never been disappointed about doing that. Not once have I done that and been like, this was a mistake. And the thing is that I've bought plenty of things that I think were expensive, right? But I can minimize my regret by saying, I'm not using money that I otherwise want to use somewhere else. And so that's my little money behavior that has served me very well, and I hope it serves you well. And if you like this one little framework, I have 28 frameworks that I teach.
Awesome. So yeah, really big thing on that one. Again, it's just to summarize, it's just shifting your mentality to, how can you afford this? What can you do in order to get it? I think from all the stupid stuff I've bought as well, I've not bought as much stupid stuff as he has. That's the goal. And again, like a lot of my purchases, like I bought my truck, I drive a Raptor, I enjoy it. It was kind of a dream. I've always, because they launched that in 2012, right when I was a freshman in high school, and I thought those were like the coolest trucks ever. I think it was 2012, right, when they launched this VT Raptor. It might have been a little bit earlier. But like a lot of my purchases typically revolve around running gear or going to races, which I think figuring out how I can pay for these with new money would be a very interesting goal. A lot of the other things I do, it's just kind of like our current home. I guess that is also around new money. I tend to agree with this framework though, because it's not prohibitive of things you want to do. Oftentimes, again, like I said earlier, we just block ourselves off from like thinking that we're even relatively like worthy of it because we're like, oh, we can't afford it, right? And then you just draw this hard line in the sand that you can't cross. When in reality, you can. You just kind of have to do some mental math, put in some work in how you can actually make that happen for you. Anyways, if you got any value from this video whatsoever, please like and subscribe to the channel. I do most of my content revolving around helping you and other entrepreneurs like yourself grow your business. And if you get value from that, stick around. And I hope you have a